This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 25th of May 2024. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with Daniella Peled, who's managing editor at the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. Author Rupert Thompson also joins us to delve into his new book, How to Make a Bomb. And finally,
we don't just look at the numbers. We want to make beautiful design products, and this is passion for us. So I think, like in all kind of business, it's really good that there are still small companies, and I hope that small companies still keep fighting back with the big ones.
Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff visits Cozy, one of the city's most popular independent publishers. All that right here on Monocle on Saturday. First though, here's the news. On Friday, judges at the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to immediately halt its military assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah in a landmark emergency ruling in South Africa's case accusing Israel of genocide. While the United Nations top court has no means to enforce its orders, the case is a stark sign of Israel's global isolation over its campaign in Gaza, particularly since it began its offensive on Rafah this month against the pleas of its closest ally, the United States. Hundreds are feared dead in a landslide that hit the Pacific island of Papua New Guinea, local media reported today. More than 300 people and over 1,100 houses were buried by the landslide that levelled a remote village in northern PNG, about 600 kilometres northwest of the capital, Port Moresby, around 3 a.m. on Friday, that's local time. 4 bodies have been recovered so far, but the landslide has blocked highway access, making helicopters the only way to reach the area. And a new study has found that crows can count out loud, and they may even have the same numeracy skills as human toddlers. Researchers found that carrion crows can produce a specific number of caws in response to visual or auditory stimuli, enabling them to count out loud between 1 and 4. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. Well, I want to start the programme in Zurich because our Bardi Market is there today, celebrating the start of summer at 90 Dörferstrasse. And our Deputy Head of Radio, Tom Webb, is on the line from Zurich. Good morning to you, Tom.
Good morning. I'm actually in the heart of the market. We've literally just opened 3 minutes ago, and I have to be honest, we're not too Swiss time. Boxes are still being unpacked around me. It is a glorious summer day, so as you say, it's the Bardi Market. It's the start of the swim season, and actually you can get your swimwear here. There are so many wonderful retailers that have come here, and you cannot get this stuff on the high street. I've got Monocle, the bike company, just around the corner. Fennel Pottery is here. Knightsbridge Rocks. You can get your world-class jewellery from Monocle's Brenda Toohey. She is just to the right of me, still unpacking. She said she'd be fine starting at 10 a.m, but she hasn't hit the 10 a.m. start. We're going to be open until 7 today. We are open 10 till 7, and the drinks will start coming out in the evening. And if you're feeling peckish, we have Madame Sum here, Tyler Brulet's favourite dim sum. I'm already eyeing out the menu.
Tom, thank you very much. That's retail and refreshment at 90 Dörferstrasse. So if you're in Zurich, do head down there. It's going to be a wonderful day if past form is anything to go by. Now, let me introduce you to my guests in the studio. They are Daniella Peled, who's managing editor at the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, and Rupert Thompson, who is the author of How to Make a Bomb, amongst many, many other books. That's just the most recent. And I must just tell you how Rupert and I met, because our daughters are the same age, and they're at school, or they were at school together. They're now in their 20s, and they were very, very good friends. And before I'd met Evie's parents, Rupert and Catherine, I was going away to Gaul in Sri Lanka to chair at a literary festival. And I said to my daughter Xanthi, would you like to have someone come and stay with you while I'm gone, just for some company? And she said, absolutely, could Evie come and stay? And I said she could. And she said, actually, Evie's mum's away, so it's quite convenient. Get to Sri Lanka. Who am I interviewing? Evie's mum, Catherine Norbury.
And also, Evie never came back. I mean, you became her second mum,
yeah,
didn't
she
you?
Basically lived at our house for about the next 2 years. But it was amazing. Catherine's nature writer, wonderful book she did called The Fish Ladder. And she's just written edited an anthology on women in nature. And of course, you, Rupert, how many books is it now?
15.
Wow.
Heavens.
I never thought I'd write that many. I thought 12 would be enough, but trouble is, I've got more ideas than I ever had before. I mean, I'm working on 3 books at once at the moment.
That's amazing.
I need to slow down.
Yeah, well, we're going to hear all about How to Make a Bomb a little bit later. Daniella, your day job sounds pretty stressful, managing editor at the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. What does that actually entail?
It's surprisingly a certain amount of war and peace, but perhaps a bit more war. We are an NGO. We work in about 30 countries around the world, experiencing conflict, transition, pressure. So we work with journalists, with civil society activists, supporting local people to tell their own stories and make change in their societies. And I oversee all of our editorial production around the globe, which is very interesting. There's certain moments of stress. And there is really quite a lot of war around, not so much peace.
And of course, the big story at the moment is the International Criminal Court. And I know that's something you've been following closely, as we had it in our headlines. It's headline news across the world at the moment. Tell us more.
Well, certainly it seems it's a momentous decision, the ICC's chief prosecutor's decision to seek arrest warrants against 2 Israeli leaders and 3 Hamas leaders, not least because it marks the first time that this move's been taken against a country which has so much support in the West. Both sides are up in arms about this. The US says it's outrageous. The UK says it's unhelpful. But I think in many similar cases, when international justice mechanisms are poised to go into effect, there are voices that say, well, this is only going to serve to prolong the conflict. This is unhelpful. And there's very little evidence of that. In fact, I was talking to Sir Geoffrey Nice this week, interviewing him, who's the chief prosecutor in the Slobodan Milosevic trial, and he said rather tellingly, well, there's really no proof to show that international justice actually works as a mechanism for preventing further atrocities. We all hope this is going to happen, but there's no evidence for or against as yet. Nonetheless, I think if one believes in the international systems, checks and balances and justice and international humanitarian law, the ICC's sort of recent reflowering, really, after the Ukraine processes can only be a good thing.
No, absolutely. And I mean, in terms of the peace side of it, it's wonderful to see a country, for instance, Kosovo, get so far away from conflict that it can now debate things that actually you wouldn't normally talk about a country that was completely at war. So the thing it's looking at the moment is legalising gay marriage. But I mean, that would have been unthinkable a while ago because so much else was going on there.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's been dominated by the conflict for many years, but this is, in the wider context of this, is eyeing EU accession. And it's still, let's not pretend, it's still a deeply conservative country. And I think there's one gay bar in the whole country in Pristina. And there's huge amounts of prejudice. But this is seen, LGBT rights is seen as a kind of, as a marker for wider liberal progression. So you have an annual gay pride in which the senior leaders are there with their pressed white shirts, looking very formal, and all the EU ambassadors. And I'm not sure that hasn't got the celebratory aspect that Pride in London might have. But yeah, this is seen as a sort of litmus test of whether countries are ready to take the next step towards entering the liberal scheme of things, which again, it's only a good thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, we're seeing a softening stance on LGBT rights in many places. Even the Pope is indicating that he's a little bit more open to it now.
Well, I think so, but it's still, as much as it's seen as a bastion of liberal values, it's also being instrumentalised. If we look at what's happening now in Georgia with the passing of the Foreign Agents Law, and lots of countries that are still under Soviet influence, the idea that the West is promoting this agenda of gay rights and gay marriage and destroying family values is still very, very strong. We have elections upcoming later this year in Moldova, for instance, where that's the fact that you have a woman leader who is unmarried, has no children. I mean, the opposition, the sort of pro-Russian opposition, have made a huge meal of that, saying, well, you see, this is it. This is what will happen if you move to the West, if you move to European values. We'll have unmarried women all over the place. Everyone will be gay. And this does have quite a lot of traction in conservative societies.
I mean, I find that extraordinary when, as I say, even the Pope is kind of softening. Very sort of Catholic majority countries are no longer rejecting this outright. But let's talk about Catholicism, because, of course, they have this whole system of saints. That people get canonized. There's lots of different levels, I believe. You become a venerable and then a blessed and then a saint. And he has canonized the first millennial saint. Tell us about that.
Well, there's this a young boy who was born in London, I think, but grew up in Italy, and he died aged 15 of leukemia, I think, of cancer. And apparently, I did not know this, but apparently you only need to have evidence. Let's say evidence, let's be charitable. Evidence of 2 miracles to become a saint, which is setting the bar fairly low, I thought. Or maybe they've sort of softened the criteria because, in the olden days, saints did an awful lot of very dramatic things, like being beheaded and carrying on speaking and so on, being burnt alive and not dying.
What's the definition of a miracle now, then?
Somebody has to pray. I mean, I'm going to be an authority on Catholicism now, but somebody has to pray to the deceased person and for a miracle, for usually it's a cure. In this case, it was 2 cures, and so it seems to have come as a direct intervention with God. Okay, fair enough. I'm willing to, I'm a huge atheist, but I'm willing to suspend disbelief. But I mean, I do see this cynically, perhaps, as part of this whole Catholic move to be a bit more millennial friendly and a bit more relevant. And I have to say that for all the criticisms one can have of organised religion, the current Pope has done a lot to show compassion. I mean, I remember years ago he was asked about whether homosexuality was a sin, and he said, well, who am I to judge? Which I thought was very nicely put. Obviously organised religion is going to be this monolithic obstacle in many ways to individual rights. But I think Catholicism in its many, many forms is still hugely relevant to people's lives. If you go to the local Catholic church near where I live, there's loads of kids, they have youth groups, they have all kinds of, there's a guy with a guitar strumming along. It still has a place in people's
it's got huge,
lives.
Yeah, cultural relevance. I mean, I think I could still know the words off by heart of every hymn in the Ancient and Modern Hymn Book. It's just having gone to an Anglican school, it's just drilled into you, and you still know it sort of 40 years later. Where are you on religion, Rupert?
Where am I on religion? Well, it's interesting hearing about Catholicism because, I've been living with, my wife's a Catholic, my daughter's a Catholic. So I just really see that as, I suppose in a very general way, I see it as providing a kind of structure, a kind of ethos. I very much separate the kind of institutions of religion, which I deeply disapprove of, from the ethos that they're promoting often, or the ethos that brought them into being. So, the ethos can be a really useful thing, I think. But somehow I have to keep those two separate.
And it's really interesting when we talk about religious fundamentalism, because it seems to me, certainly in the media, that we are not vilifying Christian fundamentalism as much as we do Islamic fundamentalism, for instance, particularly when you look at the evangelicals in the United States.
Well, I was going to say maybe because they're slightly in charge. They're slightly in charge in America. I mean, I think we can all agree that all religions have got this sort of fundamentalist attitude, although some are more prone to others. I'm in a very lucky position as a secular Jew. I can have a full religious and cultural life without believing in God and eating challah every week and lots of delightful foods, and we do seem to have, our religion seems to be mostly about festivals and cakes.
Whereas my wife was in church with my evangelical fundamentalist brother the other day, and he leaned over the pew and said to her, "You know, there's one job you've got to do, isn't there? You know what it is."
Convert you?
Yes.
Okay, well, there's somebody else who's trying to convert all of us to his side, and I'm afraid he's really not succeeding, particularly after his disastrous appearance in the pouring rain this week. I'm talking, of course, of Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, but probably not for very much longer. Daniella, this has caused just a riot in the newspaper. The headlines, Drowning Street, for instance.
Oh, I love this. I have to say, especially with all the countries I work with, where there is conflict and there's like really sectarian violence, and it's very. I mean, our country is dysfunctional in many ways, but no one writes a headline like us. And the fact that social media was absolutely flooded, pun intended, with 100 memes and 100 shots of Withnail and I and Withnail in the rain going, "We've gone on holiday by mistake." I think that does give me faith that we have got a future on this island. There is something it's a gentle, wry and kind of sensible humour where we skewer our politicians, and I'm looking forward to quite a lot more. I do feel quite sorry for the Conservatives, and then they go from that to the Titanic. Giving a speech at the Titanic launch.
Who is advising him? It's extraordinary. And the fact is that they spent millions on the state-of-the-art media room. Now, I understand he couldn't really give a party political speech from that room, but surely if he was going to be outside, there could be an umbrella.
An umbrella, but maybe an umbrella would have shown weakness. Remember the Tory sort of power stance, where they would all stand with their legs really spread apart because apparently some advisor said, "You do this, you look powerful." So maybe this was the sort of weather equivalent of that.
Although I noticed that the Tory party putting out pictures of that have carefully photoshopped out the rain on Sunak's jacket, which is quite funny.
Oh, my word.
So campaigning, of course, starts now, and we're going to see millions of photo ops, politicians doing silly things or trying to be serious. Of course, one photograph that always stands out was the then Labour Party leader, Ed Miliband, who was trying to eat a bacon sandwich. Very, very unfortunate photograph. But often eating in public is something that politicians are snapped doing. Now, one man who was really, really famous, actually, for eating junk food, really, was Morgan Spurlock. He did this whole documentary where he just ate McDonald's. I think it was for a month. He's died. Tell us more.
Well, this was right, I think this was 2004. It was right at the beginning of the reality activist documentaries, following on from Michael Moore. And Super Size Me was a film in which he ate only McDonald's for 30 days. And any time the McDonald's server would say, would you like me to supersize that, sir? He would say yes. So, I'm not a big aficionado of McDonald's, but I understand that when they say supersize me, they sort of give you a giant extra burger or whatever it is. Unsurprisingly, his insides turned to pate and he was very ill. It is unsurprising, but he made the point in an amusing way. And he made further documentaries and films, but nothing ever reached the heights of that. But I think it was very impactful. I remember the conversation around it. And I remember that was when McDonald's started introducing those little packets of mini carrots, which no child ever chose to have in their Happy Meal. But that was a sea change. It was, if I say turkey Twizzlers to the two of you, I'm not sure our international listeners might get that, but there was a similar campaign against TV chef Jamie Oliver against turkey Twizzlers, which were some sort of extruded meat product that were served in schools, and that also led to a sea change in school meals. So I think it's an interesting way in that a seemingly quite superficial, quite funny stunt leads to real change.
Why haven't Donald Trump's insides turned to pate?
Who says they haven't?
Or maybe it just starts at the top.
Oh, right.
It's just his brain so far. But you make a very good point there about activism TV, how actually it can change things. Now, one group of activists is really changing how the arts work here, and they're hoping also the outcome for Palestine. So this is a group who has been really pressurising writers to pull out of festivals that are funded by the Baillie Gifford group, which is an investment company. Now, Baillie Gifford are one of the chief sponsors of the Hay Literary Festival. They also sponsor the Edinburgh Literary Festival, Cheltenham Literary Festival. I mean, there's a lot of money from this particular group going into various arts projects, including those festivals. Hay has now said that they are dropping Baillie Gifford. Tell us more.
Yeah, this is the latest in a wave of activist protests against companies that are seen to be complicit in the war in Gaza, or even more so actually just having economic or academic or cultural ties to Israel. It's part of a wider boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, which was an activist-led call from within Palestinian civil society. It's grown and grown over the years. It's highly controversial. I mean, I have some sympathy with it because on one hand, it really is. It's a legal and non-violent means of resistance, but it has a spillover effect, which I think can be quite ugly. For instance, in North London this week, there were some really unpleasant scenes outside a North London cinema. It was part of the Israeli Film Festival. There's a documentary about the Nova Music Festival, which, of course, was attacked on October the 7th. And because it had the film festival had Israeli funding, there were all kinds of protests for it to be banned. You have other situations, for instance, in universities. Very, very activist hotbeds. They say they want to divest from all Israeli companies. They want no Israeli products on campus. But for Jewish students who will want to eat kosher food, much of which is produced there, that also has an impact. And I'm not sure that the sort of self-righteousness that is really often what it's about outweighs the impact on community relations. And also it is quite a hollow move. I mean, Baillie Gifford, okay, divest from them. They have very small investments in Israeli companies, but
which are dictated by their people, their investors.
And where do you stop? And when does it start becoming a witch hunt?
Well, just looking at the list of Hay sponsors, of course, you have the government, and we know how they feel about Israel. You also have the University of Cambridge, and you have the Rothschild Foundation, which has huge business interests in Israel, or projects.
Yeah, Israel has a huge amount of trading partners around the world. It's a hub of technology, of IT, of high tech, of startup, and again, it's really important for civil society to have a voice in this, and it's really important for activists to be involved in a non-violent and legal way. But when you get to the point where you get Charlotte Church withdrawing from a cultural festival because she wants freedom for Palestine, I'm not sure that is going to have so much impact on Israel's campaign in Rafah.
Well, George Monbiot did appear at Hay Festival because it just started this week. He said some interesting things about why he was there.
Yeah, and I think he takes the sort of reasonable view that this is not always the forum for cultural events, and not always the forum for these kinds of boycotts. I mean, I also get the idea that people will say, well, no, we need to build bridges, we need to talk. Where actually, talk and peace activism hasn't really got Israel-Palestine very far. But there is such a strong case to be made for, what other conflicts are you going to be focusing on? I mean, if you're going to focus on the arms industry in the UK, for instance, which employs a hell of a lot of people. Okay, so we cancel the arms trade here, and what jobs are all these people going to have? I mean, like I said, I'm torn a little bit because I think largely it is performative. But sometimes performative actions are important.
I mean, look at what happened in South Africa. It did make a difference.
Yeah, but this isn't we're not talking about an institutional international boycott as well, boycott and sanctions, and that happened in. I mean, that had an impact, but I think the circumstances are different. You know, each unhappy family and each conflict is different in its own way. I mean, considering the events of the last 6 or so months, there have been international moves, for instance, to sanction the Netzach Yehuda battalion, which is a ultra-Orthodox battalion accused of crimes in the West Bank. There have been individual sanctions against extremist leaders. The idea of, for instance, labelling, sanctioning Israeli products from the West Bank, which is a tiny part of its exports, but would have really quite a wide-reaching and sort of diplomatic effect. I mean, all of these are on the table in a way that they haven't been before. But again, to me, it comes down to the sort of thought of Charlotte Church looking cross, and that kind of like sort of minimises the importance of the whole thing.
No, I think it's a good point, Daniella, because I mean, I think gestures are important, but the trouble is, if you take that gesture to its logical conclusion, then you examine every single piece of funding, then you're going to find festivals, where are they going to find funding? There's going to be a problem with
Well, exactly, and the Arts
everyone.
Council is really putting less and less money in. It's a real problem.
Is it
culture.
cynical of me to say then that a gesture is important every now and then, but you shouldn't examine the whole funding structure too closely?
I mean, one's got to respect people who are doing what they feel their conscience dictates, and clearly Hay feels that. I've spoken to many, many authors who have felt a little bit of bullying pressure from groups saying you shouldn't do this, and then have felt guilty because actually they really want to promote their book. And I think it's a really difficult moral and ethical line, isn't it?
But you've already implied that the Hay Festival haven't taken it to its logical conclusion. They haven't looked at every piece of funding they have.
Well, exactly. And where do you go with that?
Where do you stop?
And there is a bit of a pick and mix choose of which conflict do you deem is bad, which conflict do you deem is okay? Where
is
do
it
you
the
stop?
conflict of the day? As it were.
Exactly. I mean, I think it is important to examine this, and especially I think with the progress is slow in the UK, but we are in the right direction when we talk about the legacy of imperialism, for instance. So I'm not going to not go to Tate Modern because the Tate family were, involved in enslaving, huge amounts of people. But I think we can have that discussion. We can be open about it and say, well, this is where the money comes from, and that's a discussion that we can have, throughout our funding systems and throughout our cultural life. And it's not too outlandish to say to people, well, look, these are the funders of the literary festival, make your own decision.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, as we say, very difficult. But Hay is on at the moment. I'm going to be there next week, and I'll be speaking to lots of authors who've either won or been nominated for the Booker Prize. That's Rose Tremaine, Howard Jacobson, Sanjeev Sahota, and Andrew O'Hagan. And of course, all those tickets available. Hay on Wye, the Book Town in Wales, very, very welcoming. So if you do find yourself free, why don't you come along? You can also watch those. All those sessions online. Now, a man who has done very, very many book festivals, and we've spoken at some of them, is Rupert Thompson. Rupert, you've got a new book out. It's called How to Make a Bomb. And it's very different from your previous work. And in fact, what I find startling about your work is that every single one of your now 15 books is entirely different. Is that a conscious decision?
That's what people say, and that's what I keep hearing. But And yes, on the surface of them, they all do look different. One's set in 17th century Italy, the next one's set right now in North London. It's actually, though, if you scratch the surface of the books, I always feel as if they have much more in common than people realise. There are certain preoccupations that recur.
Right. But in this particular book, even the structure is different because it's kind of poetry, isn't it? The way it's written. There
are no full stops. I told a friend of mine before she read it that there are no full stops, and her face fell, and she went, "Oh God!" I think she was imagining massive blocks of type, to struggle through. But the fact is, it's the opposite of that. I mean, there's loads of space on the page. It's almost like a visual representation of what Nabokov said fiction should be, which is a dazzling succession of gaps. It's what you leave out. Everyone always says, everyone talks about fiction as what you leave out is as important as what you put in. And this book actually looks like that. I mean, it came about, the lack of full stops, because I have a friend who writes emails, and she just puts a line and then another line and then another line, and there are no full stops and there's no punctuation. And it's like, it's like she's so busy that she can't possibly go back and look at an email or correct anything. You know, she's caught up in this kind of concept of her own busyness. And I suddenly looked at her emails and thought, how interesting. It's like, it's as if she's trapped in something. And since I was writing a novel about a man who was trapped in a process, I thought, why don't I try that and see what happens?
And that man is Philip Notman, who's really having a bit of a midlife crisis.
Again, I take issue with that because I think it's much more of an existential crisis than a midlife crisis. I mean, yes, he happens to be, you know, a white man in his 50s from North London, and he happens to have sort of seemingly left his wife. But what's really happened to him is that he's had this strange, disturbing epiphany where he's kind of thinks he's seen reality as it really is, and he's trapped in it, and he kind of has to do something about that. And part of that involves leaving his wife and going on this journey, which is kind of not only physical but psychological, and actually which pushes him to the very brink of destruction, I suppose you could say. Hence the title.
And there's a lot about sort of avoiding cliche. I mean, as a midlife crisis is.
Well, I mean, he says at one point, you know, people are going to think I'm having a midlife crisis. You know, but that's not what this is about. And he's very aware of how he's being seen. But you know, the fact is that he's an ordinary, everyday person to whom something strange has happened, and he could really have been in his 30s or in his 70s. It's much more about. In fact, it's not really even about a man who's thinking about whether or not to leave his wife. It's really about a man, I think, about a father who's traumatized by the unhappiness of his only son. And this is where you get into all kinds of talk about capitalism and the modern world, you know, because he seems to be a kind of Luddite. He seems to be someone who's saying the modern world is wrong, the way we live is wrong, we have to live differently and more authentically, less automatically. You know, we shouldn't be taking everything for granted because taking everything for granted is a bit like not being alive at all. And so... But he's getting all that. He's getting all those thoughts and all those perceptions from having looked at his son, you know, who's now 19, but has been depressed, has been anxious, has attempted suicide. So in a very strange way, the book, despite seeming massive and about, you know, what Timothy Morton calls the hyper-object of capitalism, you know, about trying to overturn that entire structure, the book is actually really about something very small and personal and intimate and domestic. You know, it's about a relationship between a father and a son.
I love also the sort of wordplay and the humour in it, the not manifesto, for instance.
He does write a manifesto. And in fact, I did write his manifesto because I think this book was written during COVID. And in a strange way, it was a kind of COVID book. When he travels, I had to use places like Cadiz and the south coast of Crete, places that I knew and I'd been to before. And also, he lives a lot of his life through his imagination. He's always like having an idea and imagining something that he's going to do. And then when he does it, it's completely different. And of course, we were sort of all doing that in COVID. We were imagining a life we couldn't have. And then when COVID finished, you know, we probably didn't do any of those things. So it's a COVID book in that sense.
Yeah. Well, it's called How to Make a Bomb, a novel, and it's out now. It's by, as we know, Rupert Thompson. Rupert, how important are libraries to authors?
For me, it was absolutely crucial. I grew up in Eastbourne, and my father did have books in the house, but they weren't my books. I kind of knew that even aged 9, 10, 11. I looked at his books and they just weren't for me, but somehow being surrounded by them, I went off to look for the books that I wanted. And Eastbourne Public Library at that time, I don't know who ran it. And in fact, I've always wanted to find out who was behind this. But they had the most extraordinary section of translated European fiction. I mean, people like Patrick Modiano and François Mauriac and Camus and Sartre, obviously. And those are just the French writers. And that started me on a kind of trajectory that I've been on ever since. You know, I still tend to read translated fiction, European fiction, much more than I do English. And it was an absolute it was an absolute treasure trove and a gift, you know, what that librarian had done. I wish I knew who it was.
Well, perhaps our listeners do. If so, they should get in touch. Of course, libraries also struggle with the fact that sometimes books are not brought back, and sometimes they're brought back, but they're brought back damaged. And there is a wonderful story from the Wisconsin Public Library. Daniella, tell us more about this library in Massachusetts.
Well, apparently this library has introduced an amnesty. If you have a book that's damaged, you can just send a photograph of your pet, having the pet that's responsible for nibbling the pages or chewing the cover, and they won't fine you and they won't sanction you in any way, which is lovely. Fantastic. I think also because I remember the library being a magical resource when I was a kid. But, you know, we all have this concept of the strict librarian, right? You know, shaking her finger and shushing you and so on. So this idea that actually libraries are much friendlier places these days. Apparently, and this is something I learnt today, they don't charge you overdue fines anymore. Like, who knew? Really? I mean, that's a sort of game changer as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
So obviously they have to, like the Catholic Church, they have to work hard to stay relevant. But this is a lovely, lovely, lovely idea. I think they should do this in the UK as well.
I think you're absolutely right, particularly the pet thing. I think that's very sweet.
Anything with cats.
My cat used to sleep on my books. I mean, you know, if you left them open, I mean, you just find her asleep on the open pages, you know, but she never actually damaged them.
Yeah. My dog puts her paw on whatever I'm reading to kind of tell me that I mustn't be reading, I must be paying her attention, which is annoying.
That's dogs and cats for you.
Absolutely. Not the most literate of creatures, it turns out. Let's talk about the bookshops and publishers in the indie world. So this is another instalment of our occasional series where we look at those organisations. And today we're heading to the Helsinki-based Cozy. The independent publishers found a loyal fan base. A fan bake would be an exciting thing, wouldn't it? What would it be? A loyal fan base in Nordic countries for their lifestyle books on topics ranging from Finnish design and cuisine to knitting and gardening. They feature elegant graphic design, stunning photography and well-curated content. Cozy's books are a celebration of print and everything that's great about books. Well, Monocle's Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsoff met with Cozy Publishing's art director Viola Minerva Votamo, and he brings us this report.
As the name suggests, Cozy Publishing's books invoke that warm and cozy feeling inside of us that the Danes call hygge. They're the kind of books that instantly put you in a good mood, books that you should enjoy with a warm tea in hand, lounging on the sofa in candlelight, or idling away in a summer garden. Known for their beautiful photography and graphic design, Cozy's books don't fall under any clearly definable category, such as design books or cookbooks, but focus instead on topics that make life more enjoyable. In the 10 years since its launch, Cozy has published dozens of books on topics such as gardening, cooking, knitting, Nordic living, Finnish design, and the magic of the Finnish sauna, to name just a few examples. The publisher has found a loyal fan base, and you are guaranteed to find at least one Cozy book on the coffee tables of most well-designed and beautiful Helsinki homes. To better understand what Cozy's publishing philosophy is and why we need independent publishing houses like it, I ventured into Cozy Publishing's office in Helsinki's Ullanlinna neighborhood, where I met with the art director Viola Minerva Virtamo. I began by asking her about the process of choosing the topic and the visuals for a new book.
Usually authors come to us with their topics, and I think that's what makes the book good, because it's something that the person has actually think about for years making. It's not something that we sell that we want to make a book about this thing because it's now trendy. It's something that the person has been interested in for years, something they've learned for years, and I think that's what makes the content actually really, really good. The theme has to be timeless, the content has to be something that can be used after years, but also with the design, I think it comes quite naturally. I think my style is kind of classic, and I don't like to use a lot of trendy colors. I think it comes really easily for us.
Speaking of the visuals, I mean, things like, typefaces and photography. I want to know more about your philosophy when it comes to those things.
We don't have a specific kind of rules for photography or fonts, what we want to use, but usually I do most of our book designs, and I think it comes really easily for me. I'm a photographer. And then when I've done photography for like 8 years, then at some point I realized that I also want to do the graphic design because I already had in my mind the design, what I wanted to look like. And we usually start with the photography when we do the layout design, which I think is kind of different to what most of the graphic designers do. I start always with the photography and I pick the pictures first, and then I start to find the fonts and all the other design parts of the book and want to make it look a really good, coherent piece.
In our digital age, picking up a book is always a conscious act. It's not something that just comes up on your feed as you're scrolling, but instead you make a deliberate choice to read it. According to Virtamo, Cozy's goal is to reward the reader for having made that choice.
I love to see people pick up the book and it makes them smile, it makes them really want to buy it, and that's also the reason we sell a lot in lifestyle stores. We mostly outside of Finland, we don't sell in bookstores, we sell in lifestyle stores, and it's already something that the person comes into the store and they want to be in that specific mood, usually something really Nordic and Scandinavian, and then they find our book and it's something that's similar to the pieces around that, and I think that's really important for us. We don't really believe to the death of print, even though that's something that people talk about a lot, because I think even more and more during these days people need something more than screen time. For example, with the recipes, you can find any recipe by Google. You can Google anything, but still people really need the book where someone has really kind of gathered all the good content, someone has tested the recipes. It's kind of a promise that someone really stands behind this book and its contents. And I believe people want something more than just having their phone or laptop with them in the kitchen or all around with them all the time. So I don't believe that book is dying. I actually believe that it's going to grow back even more. And even though the phone has taken some space from books, I think it's actually going backwards at some point.
Virtamo is convinced that the world needs independent publishers, people who care about books out of passion.
I think it's the same as with all kind of business, that it's really important to have small businesses within all big companies, because even though of course we are business, we need to make money, but still we are not making this for money, and we focus on design. We do this because we are passionate about books, and we are not constantly only thinking about growing and saving money, and we don't just look at the numbers. We want to make beautiful design products, and this is passion for us. So I think, like in all kind of business, it's really good that there are still small companies, and I hope that small companies still keep fighting back with the big ones.
Cozy Publishing's art director there, Viola Minerva Vertamo, and that report came from our Helsinki correspondent, Petri Burtsoff. And that's all for Monocle on Saturday. Many thanks to our producer, Mariella Bevan, and our studio engineer, Sam Impey. And of course, very grateful to our guests, Daniella Peled and Rupert Thompson. Monocle on Saturday returns next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.